question, why do Western analysts keep getting Iran wrong? Better data, bigger budgets, decades of study, and yet they keep missing it. I just filmed a new video from Budapest that explains the structural blind spot built into their entire framework. Watch it, and if you want early access to the larger project I'm announcing soon, before I say a word publicly, the waitlist link is below. Get on it.
Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, coming to you from one of the most beautiful cities in all the world, Budapest, Hungary, home to an equally extraordinary cultural and national renewal. And what's so astonishing about this renewal is it actually helps to explain what's happening, I kid you not, in the Middle East. Here's a question for you. What if the most important part of this war wasn't military? What if while the world was watching drone strikes and missile exchanges and carrier groups repositioning across the Persian Gulf, while analysts were counting sorties and tallying up battle damage assessments, the most consequential happening was something that none of the cameras actually could catch, something that no defense contractor has a budget line for, something that almost every Western commentator is professionally unequipped to even notice. What if the real war was theological? What if Operation Epic Fury was, in point of fact, a thoroughly religious war? And I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I think it's the key that unlocks everything else. When the Iranian Supreme Leader Khamenei was killed on the first day of the strikes, the Western press treated it as a political event, right? The Supreme Leader's gone, there's a power vacuum now, there's successor dynamics, there's a geopolitical realignment, all perfectly reasonable things to analyze, but all completely missing the main point. Khamenei was not primarily a political figure. He was a theological one. His authority didn't derive from elections or from military force alone or from economic performance. The legitimacy of his authority actually derived from a specific theological claim, one that held that a supreme religious scholar must be the one to govern the Islamic State in the absence of the hidden imam. Now, many people are unaware that Shiite Islam believes that the last great teacher and ruler of Islam, the 9th century Imam Muhammad al-Mahdi, never died. He's still living, but he's entered a state of temporary hiddenness. And the Iranian Ayatollah has been ordained by God to rule in his place until he appears again. That doctrine is the entire architecture of the Islamic Republic. It's not the roof of the building, it's the foundation. And when you strike the foundation, the building doesn't just change leadership, it faces an existential theological crisis. And that crisis, right, whether the hidden imam's governance can be maintained by way of an Ayatollah, that is the war that the Western press missed entirely. You see, most of Shiite society for the last 1,000 years has largely stayed out of politics, waiting for the hidden imam to return. But Ayatollah Khomeini overthrew the Shah back in 1979 explicitly with a political theology where the Ayatollah rules in the place of the hidden imam. If that rule is crushed, then the entire theological project implodes with it. So this is why secular analysts consistently fail to see this layer and why it matters so much. You see, Western political science was built deliberately and self-consciously on the assumption that religion and politics can be separated. That assumption has very deep roots. It can be traced through the Westphalian settlement in the 17th century, through the Enlightenment of the 18th century, through the rise of liberalism in the 19th century, through the entire architecture of modern social science in the 20th century. The whole enterprise was designed to explain politics without reference to theology, to bracket the sacred, to treat belief as a private variable that doesn't affect the equations of power. That assumption worked reasonably well for explaining European and American politics in the 20th century, but it catastrophically fails the moment you try to apply it to civilizations where the sacred and the political have never been separated, where they've never even been considered separable. Iran is one of those civilizations. So is much of the Sunni Islamic world that's risen up against it. So is, in different ways, Russia, China, Israel, and the rising powers of South and Southeast Asia. In each of these civilizations, Politics and theology are not parallel tracks. They're the same track. The religious framework is the political framework. The martyr is a political actor. The concept of divine justice is a policy goal. When Western analysts approach these civilizations with secular maps, they're not just missing a detail, they're missing the entire operating system. Consider the martyrdom framework specifically, because it's so alien to Western rationalism that's worth dwelling on a bit. In Western strategic thinking, death is a cost. You calculate it, you minimize it, try to avoid it. The goal is survival, victory in the preservation of resources, including human ones. A military force that loses a lot of people is losing. An ideology that sends its followers to die is irrational. These assumptions are so deeply embedded in Western strategic culture that most analysts don't even recognize them as assumptions. They seem so simple. But the martyrdom framework operates on an entirely different level. Death is not a cost, it's a currency. Martyrdom is not a failure, it's a fulfillment. A soldier who dies for the cause of divine justice does not represent a subtraction from the movement's strength. He represents the investment, the escalation of sacred commitment, a down payment on ultimate victory. The blood of the martyrs does not weaken the movement. According to this framework, it waters it. It's not a metaphor. It's an operational theology. And if you don't understand it, if you insist on analyzing it through a framework that categorizes it as irrational, you're going to consistently mispredict how these movements behave, how long they last, and what it actually takes to defeat them. So my new book, Civcosm, takes theology seriously as a political variable. Indeed, one of the most important political variables of our time. The first of Civcosm's three coordinates is theopolitics, the study of how theological commitments shape political behavior, how religious identity drives civilizational competition, and why the assumption that the sacred is fading from the world affairs is not just wrong, but it's dangerously wrong. The Iran War is a case study in theopolitics, but it's not the only one, and it will not be the last. The civilizational conflicts reshaping the 21st century are all at their deepest level theological conflicts. The question of who gets to define justice, who has the divine mandate, who speaks for the cosmic order. These questions are not fading from history, they're returning to the center of it. So that's what Civcosm prepares you to understand, not just what happened, but why it happened. Not just the military events, but the theological architecture underneath them. Not just the war that everyone saw, but the war everyone missed. You can't understand the future if you ignore theology. You can't navigate the civilizational map of the 21st century without it. And that's why I wrote this book, and that's why you definitely need to read it.